As the brutal conditions of winter tightened their icy grip on medieval society, even the most privileged were not immune to the season's merciless onslaught. In drafty, primitive castles ill-equipped for the harshest months, royal households faced a formidable challenge in staving off the biting cold and keeping the court adequately provisioned. The logistics of maintaining a royal residence during winter were nothing short of staggering. Massive quantities of firewood needed to be stockpiled to fuel the roaring hearths that provided the only source of heat. The kitchen staff toiled ceaselessly to preserve meats, grains, and vegetables that would sustain the court through the long, lean months when fresh fare was scarce. Servitors scrambled to seal every crack and gap to keep out the insidious chill. But even the most diligent preparations often proved insufficient against winter's relentless assault. In one particularly chilling tale, a medieval queen is said to have tragically perished from exposure within her own palace walls. According to chroniclers, Queen Elizabeth of Hungary was found frozen in her bed one bitter January morning in 1326, a victim of the very castle that was meant to be her refuge. As grim fates like these demonstrate, the specter of death cast its ominous paw over the medieval world in winter's dark depths. But even amidst such bleakness, the indomitable human spirit endured and found cause to rekindle hope. For much of the populace, that faint glimmer came in the form of the Feast of St. Stephen, a cherished midwinter celebration falling on December 26th. This day marked a brief respite from the unending drudgery and privation of peasant life, a rare sanctioned opportunity for revelry and indulgence. Central to the feast was the tradition of misrule, a ceremonial inversion of the normal social order. For this single day, a commoner would be appointed the Lord of Misrule, granted temporary authority to preside over the merriment and issue playful edicts to his betters. However fleeting, this act of Saturnalian license provided a vital pressure valve for the simmering tensions and resentments bred by the oppressive feudal hierarchy. The rigid lines between lord and vassal blurred for one mirth-filled day, where all could partake as equals in the feasting, gaming, and carousing. The sense of community fostered by such celebrations was more than mere diversion. It was a critical survival mechanism, with winter's cruelty threatening to break both body and spirit. One chronicler from 1377 recounts the poignant tale of two peasant families, neighbors whose meager winter stores had been exhausted long before spring's arrival. On the verge of perishing from hunger, they pooled the last of their tattered resources to share a humble meal on the Feast of St. Stephen. That gesture of generosity and unity gave them the strength to endure the season's remaining ravages. Such acts of compassion formed the very marrow of medieval society in winter, when a helping hand extended to a frost-bitten traveler, or an extra log given to a shivering widow could spell the difference between life and death. The grim shared purpose of weathering winter's onslaught together shaped a culture of interdependence that defied the era's often ruthless stratification. But even the warmest expressions of conviviality and fellow feeling inevitably cooled as winter's unrelenting misery stretched on interminably. The Feast of Stephen was but a small flare of light and levity amidst the frozen darkness, a momentary reprieve before the bleak slog of January, February, and March. As stores dwindled, bellies hungered, and the cold crept past the most assiduously stoked hearth, the faint promise of distant spring seemed to fade into impossibility. And yet, year after arduous year, medieval society endured against all odds. Through unimaginable adversity and hardship, they clung to existence, upheld by the grit, fortitude, and fellowship forged in winter's unsparing crucible. As the land lay dormant and the sun retreated, they somehow found within themselves the tenacity to carry on. One can only imagine the flood of profound relief and joy that greeted the first tentative signs of winter's passing. The slight softening of the frigid air, the incremental lengthening of daylight, the hopeful drip of icicles yielding to the sun's strengthening rays. After months of unremitting struggle, the sight of the season's initial battles against the forces of light and life must have seemed nothing short of miraculous. For the people of medieval Europe, no day was more welcome than Plough Monday, the traditional start of the agricultural year, a day when work in the fields could begin anew. The plough that had lain idle for so long was once more harnessed to oxen, and the first furrows were turned. With each sod upended to greet the strengthening sun, there was a palpable sense of relief. Life had been preserved, and hope renewed. We in the modern world, with our central heat and electric blankets, our well-marred larders and resilient infrastructure, can scarcely fathom the immense fortitude required to endure the unremitting brutality of a medieval winter. If the season's impositions seem daunting to us now from the cozy remove of our temperature-controlled bubbles, how incomprehensible must true winter suffering be? And yet, when we grumble about the minor inconveniences of a delayed flight or a rain-snarled commute, perhaps we would do well to reflect on the unyielding misery experienced by our forebears during those interminable frozen months. What reserves of resilience and tenacity they were forced to draw upon, year after arduous year, simply to survive. Their ability to eke out moments of celebration and fellowship amid such unrelenting privation seems nearly superhuman to modern sensibilities. That they not only withstood winter's ravages, but managed to find slivers of light in the all-encompassing darkness is a testament to the indomitable spirit that slumbers within us all, waiting to be roused by hardship's clarion call. So, the next time we feel our modern discontents starting to chafe, perhaps we would do well to cast our minds back to the icy plights of our forebears. In remembrance of those who came before, let us embrace the opportunity to tap into our own dormant reserves of grit and forbearance. And as we nestle gratefully into our warm beds and electric blanket, let us spare a thought for all those who fought winter's bitter siege, armed only with the weapons of will, fellowship, and undying hope. As the new year dawned and Plough Monday festivities faded into memory, medieval life settled back into its familiar winter rhythm. Short, frigid days and long, frosty nights were the hallmarks of the season. The fortunate retreated to the meager warmth of smoky hovels and drafty manors. For the less privileged, winter meant a constant battle against the elements just to survive. One of the greatest winter hardships was the ever-present threat of sickness. In the cramped and unsanitary living conditions of the time, disease could spread like wildfire. The common cold was an uncommon misery, leaving sufferers red-nosed and bleary-eyed. But far more serious illnesses also stalked the populace. Influenza was a fearsome foe, striking down young and old alike with its telltale fever, chills, and aches. In an age without vaccines or effective treatments, flu outbreaks could decimate entire communities. The winter of 1557 was particularly brutal, with a virulent strain of influenza raging across Europe.
In Paris alone, over 10,000 souls perished. Pneumonia was another stealthy killer, preying on those weakened by hunger or other illnesses. The winter dampness seeped into the lungs, causing them to fill with fluid until the victim essentially drowned. Crowded living spaces provided the perfect breeding ground for pneumonia to run rampant. It was not unusual for multiple members of the same family to succumb, leaving orphan children and shattered lives in its wake. Even royalty was not spared the ravages of winter sickness. In fact, disease often spread even more rapidly in castles and courts due to the constant flow of people in and out. A visiting dignitary or pilgrim might unknowingly bring pestilence along with their entourage.
Henry VIII lost his beloved wife Jane Seymour to postnatal complications likely exacerbated by the poor hygienic practices of the age. Children were perhaps the most vulnerable of all. Harsh weather, meager rations, and unsanitary conditions combined to make winter a truly dangerous time for the young. Infants born in the cold months faced an especially precarious start to life. In London, in the 1500s, fully half of all children did not survive to see their 5th birthday. One poignant practice of the age speaks volumes. The custom of bone lace involved tying a black ribbon to the hand of a seriously ill infant. Should the child pass away, this ribbon could then be used to secure their burial shroud, a somber reminder of winter's deadly toll on the most innocent. With danger lurking both outside the home and within, winter was a time to batten down the hatches and pray for survival. For those of limited means, even the basic comforts of shelter, food, and warmth could not be taken for granted. The icy grip of winter poverty was relentless and pitiless. Firewood was a precious commodity, with strict laws governing the gathering of fallen timbers from forests. A peasant family might huddle around a makeshift fire of dried dung and straw, striving to eke out some feeble warmth. Shivering livestock shared what heat there was, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Food supplies dwindled to a meager subsistence of salted meat, dried peas, and coarse bread. The autumn harvest bounty was a distant memory, and the first shy greenery of spring was still months away. Foraging for winter nutrients meant scouring the stark landscape for hardy fare like nettles, garlic, and mushrooms. The scarcity of fresh vegetables in winter made for some very dreary dinner pots. A typical pottage might contain peas, beans, salted pork, and if lucky, some foraged greens and wild onions for flavor. Tasteless and tedious, but enough to keep body and soul together until spring. For many, even this unappealing monotony was an unattainable luxury. Storms, droughts, pests, and other calamities could obliterate food stores, plunging entire regions into crisis. The Great Famine of 1315 was a particularly harrowing time, caused by relentlessly heavy rains that rotted crops in the fields across northern Europe. Contemporary accounts paint a chilling picture of desperate people reduced to eating dogs, horses, and even human flesh in their hunger. Parents were said to have smothered their starving children as an act of mercy. Corpses littered the streets and fields too numerous for proper burial. Although this famine was remarkable for its severity and scale, localized crop failures and food shortages were an ever-present menace. A medieval winter diet walked a tightrope between subsistence and starvation. It was a time of hunkering down with the knowledge that things would likely get worse before they got better. Beyond basic survival, winter affected every facet of medieval culture. Leisure, religious worship, and even crime and punishment took on the unmistakable stamp of the season. The sheer drudgery of scratching out an existence in the bitter cold colored all aspects of life.
Socially, winter was a time of drawing in and relying on the bonds of family and community. The cheery gatherings around the Yule log gave way to more sedate pursuits. With travel treacherous and daylight scarce, people looked inward for amusement and enrichment during the long, dark evenings. Telling stories and singing songs helped to while away the hours. The flickering light of rushlights or tallow candles illuminated scenes of sewing, weaving, and whittling. With idle hands seen as the devil's playground, industriousness was more necessity than virtue. Winter's confinement at least provided ample time for such gainful activities. For the literate, winter offered a chance to curl up with a good book, although this was a rather exclusive club. In England, at the close of the 15th century, a humble tradesman's library might boast a Bible, a Book of Hours, and perhaps some merry jests or tales of Robin Hood. Only the wealthy could afford the lavishly illuminated volumes so prized by bibliophiles. Those who could read often did so aloud for the benefit and entertainment of the whole household. Winter was a time for sharing treasured stories of brave knights, canny tricksters, and star-crossed lovers. The chivalric adventures of King Arthur and his court were perennial favorites, their intricate plots and noble themes helping to transport listeners far beyond the close confines of their winter refuge. Less wholesome entertainments also served to liven up the tedium of winter days. Gambling with dice was a popular pastime, often leading to heated tempers and empty purses. The clatter of knuckle bones and the rattle of dice would ring out in many a tavern and great hall, as fortunes were won and lost. Drink was another common winter diversion, the fermented comforts of ale, mead, and wine helping to both boost body temperature and spirits. Public houses saw a roaring trade, offering fellowship, entertainment, and an escape from the bitter cold. Inebriation often led to looser tongues and lower inhibitions, sparking lively debates, bawdy songs, and occasionally a brawl or two. The short, dark days of winter also lent themselves to quiet reflection and spiritual contemplation. The church held great sway in the medieval mind, and winter was a time to draw closer to God. With agricultural work at a lull, more time could be devoted to prayer, penance, and good works. The traditional nativity plays and pageants of Christmastide gave way to more somber devotions. As winter deepened, the pious might undertake pilgrimages to holy sites, braving the harsh conditions as a sign of their commitment and devotion. Others spent hours in hushed churches, fingering rosary beads numb with cold and meditating on their eternal soul. Charity was also an important winter value, with almsgiving seen as a Christian duty. The 7 acts of corporal mercy laid out a blueprint for generosity. Feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, sheltering the homeless, clothing the naked, visiting prisoners, comforting the sick, and burying the dead. In a season of scarcity and hardship, small gestures of human kindness could make all the difference. Of course, winter's harshness sometimes brought out the worst in human nature as well. Crime tended to rise as desperation set in and opportunities for theft increased. With people spending more time indoors in close quarters, tempers often frayed, leading to a spike in assaults and other violent crimes. The medieval justice system was ill-equipped to deal with this seasonal surge in lawlessness. Trials were often delayed until the weather improved, leaving the accused to languish in dank and overcrowded jails. Punishments could be harsh, with fines, floggings, and even executions meted out to those found guilty. But even in the face of winter's bleak realities, the indomitable human spirit endured. People found small joys and moments of levity where they could. The distant promise of spring sustained them through the darkest and coldest nights. The lengthening days of February brought a welcome reprieve with the feast of St. Valentine on the 14th. This ancient pagan fertility rite, Christianized into a celebration of love, was enthusiastically embraced by the people of the Middle Ages. It was a bright spot of warmth and tenderness in the very heart of winter's depths. The custom of drawing names for Valentine's sweethearts was well established by the 15th century. Eligible ladies and lads would gather to draw slips of paper from a bowl, sealing their romantic fate for the next year. These annual pairings often led to merry flirtations and sometimes even marriages. Flowers, sweets, and sentimental verses were common tokens of affection exchanged between Valentine's sweethearts. The simple act of receiving a handmade card from an admirer could set hearts aflutter. Even in the chilliest weather, winter, for all its woes, could not freeze the fires of love. As the feast of St. Valentine passed into Lent, the austerities of the season intensified. But there was a sense that the worst was now behind, and brighter days lay ahead. The snowdrops and crocuses poking their fragile heads through the frost offered tangible evidence that winter's icy reign was finally weakening. Throughout the Middle Ages, the relentless cycle of the seasons shaped every aspect of life, and no season stamped its mark more firmly than winter. It was a time of privation and hardship, when mere survival was an achievement. And yet it was also a time of resilience and quiet fortitude in the face of the harshest of the elements. Medieval winter was a test of the human spirit, a proving ground for the values of faith,
Family, and community. The winking icicles, frosty meadows, and long-gone fields may have been a postcard-perfect scene, but the realities of the season were anything but picturesque. However, this crucible of snow and ice and want also forged a people of remarkable grit and endurance. The Middle Ages were built on the backs of those who could weather the very worst that winter had to offer and still find reason to hope for spring. There is perhaps no greater tribute to their stubborn vitality. So the next time you find yourself bemoaning a delayed train or a slushy sidewalk, spare a thought for your medieval ancestors. Unequipped with thermal socks, central heating, or weather apps, they faced each winter as a battle to be fought with every resource at their disposal. And they emerged victorious, spring after spring. We are the heirs and beneficiaries of their tenacity and unbreakable spirit. And with that, I will leave you to your warm bed and electric blanket, secure in the knowledge that winter has been largely tamed, thanks in no small part to those who came before and showed us how it's done. May your dreams be of gentle snowfalls and toasty hearths, and may you wake to a world where winter is more friend than foe. Good night.